There is a journey some of us must take in our lives out of necessity. It's a lonely and dangerous journey, filled with fear and anxiety, but one we cannot refuse no matter how much we wish we could. It is a journey into the unknown, and we fear it may change our lives forever, because that journey, that road, often sets the tone and purpose of the rest of our lives. That journey is the road we sought to avoid because it becomes our destiny. And it's the same road that Maralee McLean has been traveling on her journey, her road, and her destiny for almost 30 years. As a child advocate, domestic violence expert, national professional speaker, and author of Prosecuted but Not Silenced: Courtroom Reform for Sexually Abused Children. She is currently the executive director of Moms Fight Back. It's an organization focused on legislation and the protection of women and children from domestic violence, child abuse, child sexual abuse, coercive control, and trauma where our family courts are failing. They are working on legislation that will be effective in all states within the United States, and that's why they need your help to duplicate and implement these protective laws in all 50 states. Maralee's story is the true story of a loving mother who fought for her daughter, who was horribly abused over her entire childhood by her father, who fooled everybody. The entire family court system, including the judge and corrupt therapists, accepted and endorsed the debunked theory of parental alienation disorder, otherwise known as PAD or PAS, that is now not recognized in any medical or psychological publication and is rejected by the American Psychiatric Association. In many cases, the corrupt family court system of judges, court-appointed investigators, and therapists use their Richard Gardner playbook to destroy families and children's lives without any regard to the welfare of the children. This is not true of all judges and cases, but it is all too prevalent in this country. 58,000 children a year are taken from a nurturing parent and forced to live with their abuser. Every day in the United States, protective parents, the vast majority being women, find themselves on trial for attempting to defend their abused children. Maralee's passion for advocacy developed through living a mother's worst nightmare. Fighting the system with body and soul, she gained the insight that this was not her nightmare alone.
Well, HB 21-1228, Julie's Law. Yes, yes, and yes.
CNN Presents, a weekly news magazine, continues now with The Investigators. Once again, here's Judy Woodruff.
Imagine trying to protect your children only to find them taken away. That's what may be happening in courtroom cases that have only recently come out of the shadows. Cases where child abuse is charged. Kathy Slobogan looks at courtroom battles where parents who report their children have been sexually abused find themselves on trial.
Do you think the fact that you reported abuse hurt you in the custody fight?
Oh, God, yes. I would have never lost my daughter. Never.
This woman, we'll call her Laura to protect her child, is only allowed to see her 8-year-old daughter for 2 hours a week. By court order, they are watched every minute they're together. Even their phone calls are monitored. Such severe restrictions would not be unusual for a convicted child abuser. Only Laura has never been charged with abuse.
What have you been accused of?
Nothing. Been accused of a mom that fought to protect her child and wouldn't shut up.
Maralee is also associated with the following organizations. Today, the Insider exclusive Justice in America news team is on location in Colorado filming this new network TV special, Moms Fight Back, Maralee McLean's Story, featuring Maralee as she tells her story, her personal journey of justice for herself and the thousands of other mothers she's helped over the years. It became a journey on a road she never imagined her own destiny. CNN captured just the beginning of Maralee's journey to justice, and our news team is here today to see how one fighting woman turned her own personal story for justice into an amazing advocacy for other women and legislative reform to protect all children. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Denver, Colorado. It is my great pleasure to introduce Maralee McLean. Welcome to the show, Maralee.
Thanks, Steve. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Tell our audience a little bit about, your personal story and how it led up to, all of the wonderful things you have done for the organization you are the head of, Moms Fight Back.
So really, Steve, what started many years ago, I'm looking at 30 years ago, and I was a domestic violence survivor in a marriage there was domestic violence. And I left the father when my daughter was 6 months old. I had full custody of her. And during that time period, he stalked me, he emotionally abused me. And back in those days, women didn't really know what domestic violence was. It was more to think you had to be beaten to a pulp, but not the emotional abuse or the financial abuse and all the other things they know today. So I'm raising my daughter and things, I'm going through a pretty messy divorce, but once things iron out a little bit, my daughter's about 2.5, and I'm just going to quickly give you an overview for the people that are listening, is that she had disclosed a sexual abuse to the daycare provider, and within a few days of that had disclosed it also to myself. I remember picking her up from her father's one day, and I had just dropped her off in this cute little dress, and I thought, oh, he's going to go nuts over her when he sees her. And I go to pick her up, and he brings her down the stairs. I knock, there's no answer. I'm thinking, where is he? And he finally comes to the door. He brings her down the stairs, and she's covered in sweat, wet, nude, and limp in his arms. And I'm like, what the heck happened to her? And he said, she's sick. And I said, that's funny, she was fine a few hours ago. And her clothes were still on the living room floor, and I got her together. That happened to probably be one of the first times that he abused her, but I didn't even think anything like that. That didn't even cross my mind. So when she disclosed to the daycare provider and to myself, she was very young, very articulate at a young age. I called my sister, who was a nurse at Children's Hospital, and I said, what do I do? She says, take her to a pediatrician, and the pediatrician will know what to do. And so that's what I did. And she disclosed again, legally, he has to notify social services. And this is where my nightmare begins. I am dealing with my daughter being abused, taking her to therapy, working a full-time job, the trauma of all of it. And I'm met by a GAL, guardian ad litem, lawyer for the child at social services. He has supervised visits at this point. And he's the perfect father, I kid you not. He's charming, he's educated, he's good looking. In those days, they didn't want to think it was like the boogeyman behind the bush or the stranger behind the tree, but not their own father raping a child. And I'm met by this GAL. She meets me with disdain, and she says she has 4 things she wants to discuss with me. And we go into this conference room, and I think I can handle this. I had just hired an attorney the day before. Hadn't even hired an attorney yet. Been going through it for months. And I was interrogated in that room like nothing I'd ever seen on a Law and Order show. Why would your daughter continue to say this if you weren't coaching her? Well, because maybe it's going on. The next comment would be, I'm gonna have you do a psychological evaluation. I'm gonna have him do it. And I said, good, maybe we'll get to the bottom of this. And she points her finger in my face and says, maybe we'll find out about you. And I'm thinking, wow. And I just met with the psychologist the day before with my daughter. She brings her out and she hands me a report and states, yes, she's being exposed to sexual stimuli and has been sexually abused. And I just read that report and I'm thinking, they'll protect her. It's black and white. They'll just protect her. I didn't even think anything of it, that was what would happen. And I said to the GAL, I said, well, have you read Dr. Baker's report? And she says, Dr. Baker does not state there's any kind of abuse whatsoever. And I'm thinking, wow, am I going crazy? So within the next thing was, I said, have you talked to the daycare provider who spends the quality time with my daughter? She had not. She hadn't even met me till that day. She'd been on the case for several months. So she said, this is parental alienation. I said, parental alienation? I didn't even know what it meant. I never heard the term before. I said, parental alienation syndrome. I said, I've been over backwards for this man to be in her life. I had a great relationship with my own father, and I wanted her to have a chance to have the same. And she said, this child's going into foster care. She had a foster care home lined up before I even walked in that morning. You don't take a child out of a primary nurturing care parent's home and place them in foster care. Totally traumatized my daughter. I mean, she went through lots of trauma from that point on, just being taken out of the home the way she was. They finally put her in with the daycare provider who was a foster care parent also. And my daughter's disclosing more sexual abuse. And she's screaming out in the night, no, Daddy, don't, owie, owie, it's bad. 5 and 6 times a night she's up crying out and arching her back off the bed. And I've witnessed it the previous 6 months. So the daycare provider calls, my daughter's displaying sexual behaviors with another little boy in a playhouse in the backyard. She calls the GAL and says, you've got to do something with what this child's going through. They put her back in my home. So this is the tricky part. They put the child back in your home, but you're not allowed to bring up the abuse again. I lost custody in the best interest of the child. This is a statute throughout all the United States. In the best interest of the child, it's the parent that's more able to nurture the relationship with the other parent that gets custody. Obviously, a parent that is a protective parent and is trying to protect their child is not going to want to nurture that relationship. So I ended up losing custody at that point. I had new attorneys that came in to appeal everything that had just happened. I was in court for 10 years. I wasn't in court for a day or a week. I was in for weeks and months at a time, trying to protect my daughter. The more evidence that came out on abuse, there was 3 hospital reports, 3 doctors' reports, 3 police reports in the state of Colorado. The Child Advocacy and Protection Team from the Children's Hospital, the top sexual abuse team in the state of Colorado, wrote a letter to my judge concerning the sexual abuse of my child. By this point, she had physical evidence, and they're still not protecting her. I lobbied in Washington, D.C. at this time. I turned over, every rock I could turn over to protect my daughter. I went to the governor. I started lobbying in Washington, D.C. I did get a lot of media coverage. At one point, the judge, after I had lost custody, they had these 2 therapists that came in the state of Colorado that stated I had PAS. Now, parental alienation syndrome was concocted by Dr. Richard Gardner back in the 80s. That's when my case started. And he states in his own books, he self-published his books, he says we all have some pedophilia within us that makes little girls and little boys better sexual partners, that you need to have more pity for the pedophile than scorn. And he's saying gag these moms, jail these moms. Well, guess what's been happening all these years? So obviously I'm receiving a gag order and I'm getting threatened with jail. I mean, it was absolutely horrific. And every time I went to court and the more evidence that came out, they still allowed her to go back to her father. So once these 2 therapists got on and my attorneys are appealing everything, and I've gone through hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees, and I just want to make it clear to the public out there that these cases are rampant. I'm not the only one that ever went through this. There's thousands of them. And I go to, they have me go through supervised visits. I'm lobbying in Washington, D.C. all day. I come back, I'm at the airport, and I call my attorneys just to see what's going on in my case. And they go, Maralee, there's an emergency hearing on your case right now. Ex parte emergency hearing without me even present. It's illegal. And to take my daughter away from me. I said, they can't do that. You tell my attorneys not to take that phone call. The paralegal's on the phone. She says, they have to. It's the judge. They take the call. I lost my daughter over the phone by these 2 therapists that write a 70-page court report, not court report, but an evaluation. They left out 25 witnesses. They left out all the doctor's reports, all the police reports, all the therapist reports. They left out everything and stated I had PAS and that I was going to run with my daughter. If I was going to run, I'd been gone when she was 2. I had no intention of ever running. I believed the system would protect the child. So I end up losing, and I get supervised visits at this point.
How old is she at this time?
She is 4.5, almost 5. Okay. I get supervised visits for, 8 years, treated as a hardened criminal. I mean, I got to see my daughter 1 hour a week, supervised in a little 8 by 10 foot room. I watched that beautiful little girl with her long dark hair fall out, her hair fall out. Her eyes are in a trance-like state. There's times when she would lie on the floor and she'd say, I can't see you. And I'd say, you can too see me. She goes, no, I can't see you. I want to die. That's where my child was going. And there was nothing in the world I could do to stop what was happening. And so I'd go through all those supervised visits and more hearings and a lot of media coverage, and the media covered my story very heavily here in Colorado, full-page newspaper coverage. I had a rally at the Capitol.
In your favor?
Yes. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was excellent media coverage. And I had the judge on one of the last judge that I had, he ordered me to pay child support higher than the father ever paid me. I had to pay all court costs, all therapy fees. I mean, everything. I mean, in other words, they bankrupt you. So these women are being bankrupted. So you're bankrupted so you can't fight. And then you go to the media's covering it, and they did an exceptionally good job, but I still didn't get my daughter home. And then about, I think she was 9, CNN, International News, covered my story on parental alienation with Richard Gardner. And it's the only piece we have out there in the nation on Gardner and what he's done and what his theory has done to thousands and thousands of children out there.
Laura, who lives outside Denver, is one of a growing number of parents, mostly women, accused of having an emotional disorder called PAS, parental alienation syndrome. The idea is that one parent caught up in a custody battle programs children against the other parent, even fabricating charges of sexual abuse. Laura has had only supervised visits with her daughter for nearly 4 years.
I'm not a mother. I can't be a mother. You're not allowed to go to her school. I taught her how to swim when she was 2. I've never seen her in her swim meets, her ballet, Christmas, her grades. I've never even seen her grades.
PAS is controversial, splitting the experts. Some say that a diagnosis of PAS gives judges license to ignore evidence of sexual abuse, even the child's own report. Critics say the PAS label can be misused against parents legitimately trying to protect their children. They say it's become the defensive choice for child abusers, punishing the accusers and silencing the children.
The man behind PAS is Dr. Richard Gardner.
It's not a rare phenomenon. It's quite common.
Gardner, a Columbia University psychiatrist known for his innovative work on children of divorce, coined the term parental alienation syndrome. He says it usually arises when a mother afraid of losing custody uses false accusations as a weapon.
In about 90% of cases, it's the mother who is the programmer and the father who is the victim of the campaign.
We'll proceed to opening statements.
Gardner has aggressively promoted his ideas through books and lectures, ideas that have taken hold in courtrooms across the country.
Madam Guardian ad litem.
Yes, Your Honor. I consider myself an expert on sex abuse hysteria. I consider myself an expert on the PAS.
I have a lot of different...
By now, Laura also considers herself an expert on PAS.
Notice of hearings. I spent 6 years of my life fighting with everything I had. You're up against a whole group of people that believe in his theories, and you don't get out of it.
I testified before Congress just before that, and I had a rally at the Capitol. And this rally was with an attorney out of New Jersey. Her name was Joan Pennington, and she was the real guru in all this. She understood gender bias. She understood what the system was doing. And she wrote a brief on the hardest custody cases, which these are the hardest cases there can be. And she said, Maralee, since you're getting so much media attention in your Colorado, let's have a rally at the Capitol in Denver to because the media is covering your story so heavily, to bring attention to all these other mothers' stories. So there was probably 50, every single state was covered, mothers coming from every single state. And these are good, loving, educated, every socioeconomic status, every race, every religion, it doesn't matter. It's happening to them. And it's like the same exact thing over and over coming down where the systemic failure, that's what we're seeing. So have this rally. It was a great grassroots effort. And there were congressmen there and senators there. And it was just, I remember Joan Pennington say, this is like, it took them 20 years to listen to domestic violence, and we do not have another 20 years for them to listen to this issue. And she said when she started the center that she started, National Center for Protective Parents, she said we started taking a list of mothers. Today, we're changing that list, and we're taking a list of judges. And the first judge on that list is going to be Judge Michael Beda, who sentenced Maralee McLean's child. Still makes me cry, to a lifetime of abuse. And that's exactly what he did. Lifetime of abuse.
Is he still on the bench?
Oh, no, he got removed from the bench. Now, that's another good thing. That he got removed from the bench. In the history of Colorado, there's like only 2 judges during that maybe 20-year span got removed from the bench. He got removed due to attorneys writing in for delivering punishing court orders to women. So that was really, I was very happy to see that man be removed.
Well, was he anti-women or anti-mother or what?
You know, it's not just him, because there are women judges that are doing this to women out there. I thought, you know, it is systemic failure. These judges are not educated in this. They're not trained in it. They sit on the bench in Colorado for 2 years, rotate and get off. They have no training in domestic violence, no training in child abuse, child sexual abuse, trauma, personality disorders. They don't know what they're dealing with. And so you have that going on, and it's a bigger picture. Society doesn't want to look at this. You know, look at how long it took them to listen to the Me Too, or to Sandusky, the coach that raped the boys, and the Catholic priest. This is a taboo that nobody wants to listen to, but it's damaging thousands of children, and we know it's a billion-dollar industry.
Right. You wrote a book.
Yes, I did.
Detailing not only your story, but all the issues involved in what you've just been talking about. Can you show our audience the book here right now?
It's Prosecuted but Not Silenced, and that's the name of it, because I was prosecuted, but I was never silenced. And it's courtroom reform for sexually abused children. And what I did in the book is I documented everything. So I always tell mothers when I speak at conferences or law schools or wherever I am speaking, I always say, document, document, document. It's critical. And that's how I was able to write this book. So it's got the emotional story, which is tear-jerking, hard read, but I'm finding people are reading it. It's 400 pages and they're reading it in 2 days because they don't put it down. The other part of it is it has the research and the legal. So, and then what I did in there is when you're reading something, you think, oh, that couldn't happen. Then it says go to addendum A, and there's the police report, or there's the doctor's order, or there's a judge's order. So I backed everything up of what I was saying. It's an educational tool for judges, lawyers, psychologists, social workers, medical personnel. Anybody involved in the system, all court personnel should be reading this book.
This book and all of your efforts led to new law being established. Yes. Was it this year? January of this year?
No, last year, 21.
21. It's called Julie's Law, named in honor of your daughter. Tell our audience what Julie Law is and how it protects moms and kids.
So how I got Julie's Law, I just want to maybe give a little bit to that, is I'm with Moms Fight Back. I'm the executive director, and I know a lot of women that are going through this same thing that's happening in the courts. So I pulled those women together. The best part of getting that legislation passed was the testimony of these women. There wasn't a dry eye in the Senate, and there wasn't a dry eye in the House once these women testified. So they all have similar cases. What it is, we really set out in that law was to get judges training. That was the main goal of the law. We did not get it passed through, but we did get all court personnel, so GALs, CFIs, which are custody evaluators, PREs, all therapists. And the other part of the law is the court personnel and judges to be trained and on coercive control, and domestic violence, child abuse, child sexual abuse has to be fully litigated before you ever go into determining anything else in a case. We also wanted judges have discretionary rule in civil court, so they can take in information, or they can throw it out. They don't have to look at all the information that you have there. Just like Judge Beta did, he threw out police reports and doctor's reports. So I know that sounds crazy, but they are doing it. And it isn't just that judge, because I had 8 judges, so it is a problem all the way through. But anyway, so they have discretionary rule. We want to make sure that they have to stick to the admissibility standards that are written in the legislation. So there's that, and then the accountability and transparency in the courtrooms. We have no accountability and transparencies in our courtroom.
When you talk about they have to get training from whom now? We
want it to be specialized training. So George Washington University, there's a woman by the name of Joan Myers. She's an attorney. And she did the training for Julie's Law here in Colorado. But what was great about that is they had me come in and do just a very short blurb of what happened to my child and the mother, blah, blah. And then after that, they had all the top professionals from the United States. I mean, all the top people I've been dealing with for 30 years, people I highly respect in this issue, all came in to teach on that conference. That was not a conference, it was a training, and that was an excellent training. And that's the training I would like to see go in every single state along with Julie's Law.
Right. Now you mentioned Moms Fight Back. You've been the executive director since 2014. Tell our audience what you want to achieve with Moms Fight Back now that you've established legislation in Colorado.
I'd like to see the legislation continue in every single state. So that's what Moms Fight Back would be, to move that legislation to every single state. On top of it, the training, I'd like to see getting funding. We need a lot of funding for that kind of training to happen. And a legal team that can work with these women, because they are bankrupted by our courts. These are, like I said, educated women from every walk of life, and their lawyer fees are $350,000, $400,000. It's not a little bit of money when you're going into this. It's a lot of money. So they're losing everything trying to fight for their children. So I'd like to see legal representation come in to help with that. I'd like to see more research. We have good research. We need a lot more research on what's happening in these cases.
Right. We talked before the show, for maybe the last couple of weeks, and we were talking about how that might happen when you're talking about that magic number, money, right? That magic word. You've recently written a letter to a woman by the name of Mackenzie Scott, Jeff Bezos' ex-wife, right? Who was awarded in her divorce, I don't know, $60-some billion, who has publicly stated, and not only stated, but is actually walking her own talk of giving away money to organizations like your own that have an established history and a record of doing this, on a meager budget, which you have. You've done this all by yourself, financed all by yourself, right? Tell our audience how you can see your dream implemented, that other states enact the same kind of legislation like Julie's Law all around the country. How can that happen? What do you need?
Mackenzie, I was thinking of she's a child advocate, and she's a woman that I believe would take highly to this issue if she knew what was going on. And really what we do need is media coverage. We need public relations. We need a lot of media to cover this, because mainstream media is not picking it up. And so there are children that are being murdered. There are children that are forced for the rest of their lives to live with the abuser. And until we can get a training put into context where we have the funding to do that, it's going to take money. It would take lots of money. So it would take money for that. It would take money for the lobbying. That lobbying part of it, we would just probably hire a lobbyist, and I myself would go state to state to get Julie's Law passed in every state. There are a lot of other laws that are going right now, but they just haven't passed yet. But it's like Caden's Law, Kira's Law. So people are trying to get this to the public and get it into legislation, and that's what needs to happen. And it needs to have it written a specific way so that we can protect these children, because we're not protecting them. And if you think this can't happen to you, it can. I don't care. It could be your mother, your sister, your niece, and your child. It is rampant. This is not, I'm not saying this lightly, how much this is going on.
Well, you are an amazing individual to have that same fire and fervor after 30 years in which...
I'm tired.
I realize you're tired, but you need help. You have just by yourself, you've driven this all the way to the state legislature. You've been on lots of TV shows, talking about the same talk. And a lot of people need to be aware of it. And I hope Mackenzie Scott is watching and her team is listening to this right now. I want to thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate you having me on your show.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.